The invitation said 36th birthday, but the room smelled like a merger. My husband stood under the crystal chandelier, gripping his champagne flute like a weapon while his investors circled. He thought he was about to toast to our divorce and bury me under a mountain of debt before the appetizers were cleared. He did not know that I had already stopped being his wife 5 minutes ago. Tonight, I was just the witness who brought the matches. My name is Marla Quinn, and as I walked into the ballroom of the Larkmont Hotel in Kendall Harbor, Maryland, the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was a suffocating blend of $50 an ounce perfume, polished mahogany, and the heavy, cloying scent of buttercream frosting. The space was beautiful, gleaming with gold accents and crystal chandeliers that scattered light like diamonds. But my stomach turned. I told myself that this was my 36th birthday party. I tried to force a smile onto my face as I navigated the crowd. However, the atmosphere did not feel like a celebration of life. It felt like an acquisition announcement. I scanned the room, looking for a friendly face. But the guest list was a stranger to me. There were no friends from my old neighborhood, no cousins, no one who knew me before I became Mrs. Graham Voss. Instead, the room was packed with men in charcoal suits and women in dresses that cost more than my first car. These were Graham's business partners, potential investors, shark-eyed lawyers, and reporters from the local business journals. They held their champagne flutes like scepters. I realized with a sinking feeling that this was not a party for me. It was a declaration of ownership. My husband, Graham Voss, stood in the center of the room like a sun pulling planets into his orbit. At 38, he was the CEO of Voss Meridian Partners, and tonight he looked every inch the titan of industry he desperately wanted to be. He was laughing at something a venture capitalist said, his head thrown back, teeth white and perfect. He was the star of the show. I, on the other hand, had been ushered to a high-top table at the edge of the parquet floor, positioned in the shadows. I was the decorative wife, placed there to soften his sharp edges, expected to wave and look grateful. I watched Lena Klein, the director of PR for Graham's company, slide through the crowd. She was a woman made of sharp angles and cold efficiency. She stopped next to Graham, standing just inside his personal space, closer than a colleague should. She whispered something in his ear, and he nodded without looking at her. Then, Lena turned her head and locked eyes with me across the room. I braced myself for a glare or a sneer, something that signaled a rivalry. But there was nothing. Her expression was completely devoid of emotion. It was the look a chess player gives a pawn that has already been sacrificed. She had already done the math on me, and I had come up 0. A group of lawyers drifted near my table, their backs to me. They did not lower their voices, assuming I was too far away or perhaps too unintelligent to understand them. "We are going to close it tonight, right?" one man asked, swirling his drink. "Yeah," another voice replied, low and rough. "Graham said the cap table is finally clean. Just make sure she does not make a scene when it happens." "Do not worry," a third voice chimed in. "Everything is drafted." I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I did not fully understand what a clean cap table meant, but the tone of their voices felt like a thin, cold blade sliding against my skin. They were talking about an obstacle. They were talking about me. I looked down at my dress. It was a navy silk slip I had bought 4 years ago, carefully altered and hemmed to look new because Graham had said we needed to save cash for the expansion. Then I looked at Graham's wrist. He was wearing a platinum pilot's watch, the exact limited edition I had seen in glossy magazine ads. I knew that watch. I knew it because I had worked double shifts at the logistics center for 3 months to pay the deposit on it. I was wearing a budget cut. He was wearing my sacrifice. Suddenly, my clutch vibrated against my hip. I startled, pulling my phone out and shielding the screen with my hand. The message was from Joni Quinn. My Aunt Joni was a retired federal financial investigator who did not believe in pleasantries. "Don't drink anything. Don't sign anything, and if he pulls a stunt in front of the crowd, do not react like a wife. React like a witness." My breath hitched. I shoved the phone back into my bag, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I tried to inhale, counting to 4, but the air felt too thin. Before I could compose myself, a waiter materialized out of the crush of people. He did not offer me a drink. He placed a thin, cream-colored envelope on the table directly in front of my hands. It had a label printed in stark black letters for Marla Urgent. I stared at it. My fingers trembled as I reached out. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice of the MC boomed through the speakers, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "If I could have your attention to the stage, please welcome the man of the hour, Graham Voss, who has a very special surprise birthday gift for his lovely wife." The applause in the ballroom was deafening, washing over me like a physical wave. But my mind was suddenly 5 years in the past. I was not standing on a plush carpet in a designer dress. I was standing in the parking lot of a used car dealership, handing over the keys to my Honda Civic. That car was the first thing I had ever owned outright. I sold it, along with draining every cent of my $42,000 retirement fund, to hand Graham the seed money for what he called the future of our family. Back then, I was the operations manager at Arborline Dispatch and Logistics. My life was measured in 12-hour shifts and the relentless, piercing beep of barcode scanners. I knew the rhythm of a conveyor belt better than I knew the sound of music. I came home smelling of cardboard dust and diesel fumes, my feet throbbing in boots that had worn through at the heel. But I did not buy new boots. I did not buy anything because every spare dollar went into Graham's vision. I remembered the night he sat me down at our scratched kitchen table, his eyes bright with a feverish intensity. "Marla, babe, you have to understand," he had said, gripping my hands tightly. "My credit score is wrecked from grad school loans. No bank will touch me. But you are pristine. We just need a bridge, so I signed applications for high-interest credit cards. I signed personal guarantees for small business loans. I even signed the incorporation papers for a limited liability company with the innocuous name of Quinn Harbor Consulting. I asked him why we needed a separate entity from the main tech startup, and he had kissed my forehead, smoothing away my worry. "It is just for tax efficiency," he had promised. "It protects the main asset. It is standard practice." I lived on instant ramen and skipped my annual physicals for 3 years. I walked around with a toothache that throbbed like a second heartbeat because a root canal cost $800 that we did not have. Whenever I wavered, Graham was there with a new promise. "Just hold on," he would whisper in the dark. "When the Series A funding closes, I will buy you a whole new life. I will pay you back for every second of this." But the Series A funding closed, and the only thing that changed was the password on his phone. He started coming home late, smelling of cedar smoke and a sharp, floral perfume that I did not own. He bought tailored suits while I was still gluing the soles of my work shoes. Then came the moment the cracks truly began to show. I had walked past his open laptop and saw a notification slide onto the screen. It was an email subject line that burned itself into my retinas. "Term sheet Series B, keep spouse off the thread." When I confronted him, he laughed. But it was a cold, dismissive sound. "You do not understand. This is a big game," he had said, not even looking up from his phone. "Investors get nervous about family involvement. Do not overthink it." I chose to believe him because believing him was cheaper than the alternative. I pushed down the voice of my Aunt Joni, who had warned me over a cup of black coffee in her small kitchen. "Marla, listen to me," she had said, her voice grave. "People do not get rich that fast and stay clean, especially when they need you to sign the papers but won't let you in the meetings. He is building a castle, but he is using your back as the foundation." I had called her paranoid. I told myself I was a partner. But as I looked around the room, I realized the humiliating truth. I was never a partner. I was not in the company photos. I was not mentioned in the Forbes interviews. My name existed in only one place on the debt. I had been positioned perfectly as the back-end logistics for his dream. I was the mule who carried the load so he could run fast. I looked up at the stage where Graham was beaming, holding the microphone like a trophy. The realization settled over me, cold and heavy. This was not a birthday party. This was a closing ceremony. He had used me to build his empire, and now that the structure was sound, he was about to demolish the scaffolding. Graham raised his flute of vintage champagne, the bubbles catching the light like liquid gold. The room hushed instantly, an obedient silence that money always seemed to command. He looked down at me from the stage with a smile that was practiced, polished, and utterly devoid of warmth. "I want to start by thanking Marla," Graham said, his voice smooth as velvet. "She has been a silent supporter of this journey for a long time. Let's give her a round of applause." The room erupted in polite, measured clapping. I sat frozen, my hands clenching the napkin in my lap. The applause felt like rain on a tin roof, distant and cold. But then, Graham's expression shifted. He set his glass down on the podium, his face assuming a look of solemn gravity. "However, today is also a day for the truth," he continued, leaning into the microphone. "Birthdays are milestones. They are moments when we assess where we are and, more importantly, where we are going. And sometimes, to reach the next summit, you have to acknowledge what you must leave at base camp." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Voss Meridian is entering a new era," Graham announced, his eyes locking onto mine with a predatory intensity. "And the truth is, Marla and I have grown apart. My vision for the future requires a partner who can run at this pace. And frankly, Marla has always been happier in the background. She is a simple woman with simple needs, and I would never want to be a burden on her happiness by forcing her into a world she does not understand." He paused for effect, letting the humiliation sink into my skin. "So, in the spirit of transparency and new beginnings, I think it is best we conclude our marriage. Right here. Tonight." The silence that followed was absolute. The MC looked like he wanted to vanish through the floorboards. A few investors chuckled nervously, unsure if this was a joke or a corporate strategy. I looked over at Lena Klein. She was standing by the stage, sipping her drink. She was not surprised. She was smiling just enough to show her teeth. A look she must have rehearsed in the mirror while I was at home waiting for a husband who never came. I looked down at the envelope labeled urgent that sat on the table. My fingers felt numb as I tore the seal. Inside was a single page, a summary of a divorce settlement. It was brutal in its brevity. I would receive a lump sum of $10,000 as transitional support. In exchange, I would retain sole ownership of Quinn Harbor Consulting, the shell company that held over $300,000 in business loans. He was not just leaving me, he was burying me. Graham stepped off the stage and walked toward my table, the spotlight following him. He looked like a benevolent king coming to comfort a peasant. He leaned down, ostensibly to kiss my cheek, but his lips brushed my ear with a whisper that was cold as ice. "Don't make me look bad, Marla," he hissed, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You are out of your league. If you explode or cry, I will make you a laughingstock on LinkedIn before you get to the parking lot. Take the deal." My throat constricted. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and shatter every crystal glass in the room. But then, Joni's text flashed in my mind. "React like a witness." I forced my breathing to slow. I did not shed a tear. Under the tablecloth, my hand slipped into my pocket and swiped the screen of my phone. Activating the voice recorder app, Graham pulled back, smiling for the cameras, and then he did the unthinkable. He held the microphone out to me. It was a trap. He wanted me to take it. He wanted me to sob, to beg, to scream insults so he could look like the long-suffering genius dealing with an unstable ex-wife. "Would you like to say a few words for the guests?" "Marla," he asked. his eyes daring me to break. I stood up. The legs of my chair scraped loudly against the floor. I took the microphone from his hand. The metal was warm from his grip. I looked at him. Then I looked at Lena. And finally, I scanned the room full of strangers who thought they were watching my funeral. I smiled. It was small, but it was steady. "Thank you, everyone," I said, my voice clear and calm, echoing through the hall. I also like the truth. I find it very refreshing, especially the kind of truth that comes with a timestamp. Graham's smile faltered. The room went dead silent. The air crackled with a tension that was sharp enough to cut glass. I held the microphone for 1 second longer than necessary, letting the words hang there before I handed it back to him. The game had officially started. I stepped out of the golden glow of the ballroom and into the muted beige of the service corridor. The applause for my husband's performance was still muffled behind the heavy double doors, but out here, the air was cooler and smelled faintly of floor wax. I did not have to wait long. Aunt Joni stepped out from the shadow of a linen cart. She did not look like a guest. She was wearing a dark wool coat buttoned to her chin and holding a slim leather file folder. Her eyes were dry and sharp as flint. Without a word of greeting, she pressed a heavy silver key and a small black USB drive into my palm. The metal was cold against my sweating skin. "He came to my house back in August," Joni said, her voice low and clipped. "He wanted me to co-sign a bridge loan because your credit was finally maxed out. I told him to get off my porch. And then I turned on my recorder." She tapped the USB drive in my hand. "Listen to the first file later, but know this," she continued. "He does not talk about you like a wife. He calls you a resource. He told me you were just a breathing credit line. He explicitly told Lena to handle the media fallout because he knew he was going to dump the debt on you months ago." I felt a wave of nausea roll through me, but I swallowed it down. Joni gripped my shoulder, her fingers digging into the silk of my dress. "Marla, listen to me. This is not just a bad breakup. You are his front. If this company goes down for fraud, and it will, his name is nowhere near the toxic debt. Yours is." She pointed to the silver key. "That opens box 402 at Stonehall Trust. Inside, you are going to find the original incorporation papers for Quinn Harbor Consulting. You will also find tax returns from the last 2 years. I never saw any tax returns for that company." I whispered. "I know," Joni said grimly, "but your signature is on them. I had a buddy at the bureau pull the copies. They are forgeries, Marla. And worse, there is a Schedule K-1 form filed with the IRS. My head was spinning. I knew enough about business from my time at Arborline to know what a K-1 was. "A K-1," I asked, my voice trembling. "But it means on paper, you are a partner receiving profits." Joni finished for me. "The IRS thinks you are taking home money, while in reality, you are just holding the bag for the losses. If we do not prove he set you up, you are looking at tax evasion charges while he walks away clean." The reality of the trap Graham had built around me was terrifying. It was a cage made of paper and ink, designed to look like a marriage. I looked at the small drive in my hand. It was no longer just data. It was my life preserver. Joni leaned in close, her face inches from mine. "Revenge is not screaming," she said, her tone absolute. "Revenge is not throwing wine in his face. Revenge is placing the right document on the right desk, in front of the person he fears the most, at the exact moment he cannot delete it." I nodded. The trembling in my hands stopped. The sadness that had been weighing on my chest for the last hour evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I was done being the victim. "Go back inside," Joni instructed. "Do not let him see you sweat. Tonight, do not fight him with emotion. Tonight. We set the hook with evidence." I slipped the USB drive and the key into the hidden pocket of my clutch. I smoothed the front of my dress and took a deep breath. When I pushed the doors open and walked back into the party, my face was a mask of perfect calm. In my pocket, I was carrying the difference between a divorce settlement and a federal indictment. Joni steered me away from the ballroom and down a service hallway, ducking into a small, rented business suite on the second floor of the hotel. The room was small, but the atmosphere inside was intense. It felt less like a meeting room and more like a war room. Papers were spread across the mahogany conference table in organized chaos, covering timelines and flowcharts, while a laptop hummed in the center. Behind the desk sat Renee Calder. I knew the name. Renee was a former federal prosecutor who had pivoted to civil litigation, and she had a reputation for hunting white-collar criminals for sport. She did not stand up to greet me. She just extended a hand, her eyes scanning my face with the precision of a laser. "Sit," Renee commanded, her voice raspy and authoritative. Joni briefed me on the basics. "Let me see the paperwork he gave you." I handed over the urgent envelope containing the divorce settlement. Renee flipped through the pages, her expression tightening with every paragraph. She let out a short, cold laugh that sounded like dry leaves crunching. "Classic," she muttered. "He wants to frame the debt transfer as voluntary spousal support to avoid gift tax triggers. He is trying to make you sign a confession that you owe this money." She looked up at me. "If you sign this, you are not just divorced. You are bankrupt." She tossed the papers onto the table. "Joni says you have leverage. Show me." I placed the USB drive and the documents from the safety deposit box on the table. I pointed to the K-1 tax form. "He listed me as a partner," I said, my voice gaining strength. "According to this, I received $50,000 in profit last year. I never saw a dime. I was buying groceries with coupons while he was telling the IRS I was solvent." Renee picked up the form, her eyes widening slightly. "This is wire fraud," she stated flatly, "and tax evasion. Do you have proof he controlled the accounts?" "The audio," Joni interjected, "on the drive. He admits he uses her as a front. He admits to controlling the flow." Renee nodded, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. "Okay, we have enough for a two-pronged attack. First, I am filing an emergency motion to freeze assets based on marital fraud. Second, we are submitting a structured tip to the SEC and FinCEN regarding suspicious money laundering activities." Just then, my phone vibrated violently in my hand. I looked down. It was a message from Nina Sutter. Nina was an old college friend who Graham had hired as a junior accountant 3 years ago. We had not spoken in months, but the message preview made my blood run cold. "Marla, I am shaking. I just saw the transfer log. They are using Quinn Harbor, your company, to move 6 figures to the Cayman Islands tonight. I have screenshots, but I am terrified he will find out." I showed the screen to Renee. The lawyer's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. "Get her on the phone. Now." I dialed. Nina picked up on the first ring, her voice a breathless whisper. "Marla, I don't know what to do. The IT guys are hovering." Renee leaned toward the speakerphone. "Nina, this is Renee Calder, legal counsel. Listen to me very carefully. If you send us those screenshots, I can file you under federal whistleblower protection within the hour. You will be immune. But if you stay silent and they find those logs later, you go down as an accomplice. Do you understand?" "I'll send them," Nina stammered. "I'm sending them now." "Good," Renee said. "I am drafting an affidavit for you. I need you to digitally sign it the second it hits your inbox." As the email notification chimed on Renee's laptop, the full picture clicked into place for me. Graham's empire was not just a business. It was a house of cards built on relationships, investors, media, charity boards. He did not care about money as much as he cared about the perception of power. To destroy him, I did not need to be richer than him. I just needed to expose him to the one thing he feared more than poverty, public legal liability. Renee looked up from the screen, her work done. She tapped a pen against her chin, looking at Joni. "Why did he choose tonight?" Renee asked. Why do this at a birthday party with 200 people watching? Joni adjusted her coat, her expression grim. Because he relies on social pressure. He thinks the crowd will make Marla polite. He thinks she will be too embarrassed to make a scene, so she will just fade away. Renee smiled, and this time, it was a genuine, dangerous smile. Then he made a fatal calculation. Renee said, "He brought us an audience. We are going to use that crowd as witnesses. Tonight, we turn the room into a mirror, and we force him to look at himself." She closed her laptop with a snap. "Go back out there. Marla, the motion is filed. The trap is set." I slipped back into the main ballroom, but my posture had changed. I was no longer the shrinking wife trying to make herself invisible against the drapes. I was an investigator walking into a crime scene. I moved slowly, scanning the room with a cold, detached precision. I watched who was whispering to whom. I noted that the heavy hitters, the bankers from New York and the venture capitalists, were all clustered near the front, checking their phones and nodding. They were not eating the cake. They were waiting for a signal. My eyes landed on a small, high podium set up to the right of the main stage. It was not there for speeches. A tablet was mounted on it, glowing softly, displaying a document with a signature-required field blinking at the bottom. Beside it sat a velvet rope. I realized with a jolt that this was a mini announcement. Graham was planning to launch his new fund and sign the commitment letters right here, tonight, capitalizing on the buzz of the party. The tablet held the digital contracts. If he signed those, the new money would be locked in, and he would have the capital to bury me legally for the next decade. I glanced toward the back of the room. Aunt Joni was already moving. She had charmed her way into the audiovisual booth, leaning over the shoulder of the young technician with a confused, kindly aunt expression. "Oh, honey, I just have this little birthday video for my niece," I heard her say as I passed by. "Can I just plug this into the HDMI port just to test it?" The technician, disarmed by her gray hair and sweet tone, nodded and plugged in the cable connected to her laptop. He did not know he had just given the prosecution a direct line to the main projector. I kept moving, feigning a need to use the restroom, and slipped into the logistics corridor behind the kitchen. The air here was hot and smelled of dish soap. I saw Lena Klein standing with the head of security, her back to me. "Listen to me," Lena snapped, her voice devoid of the charm she used on camera. "If Marla starts to cry or raises her voice, escort her out the side exit. Do not let her near the press line. We have the car waiting." I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering. On the table next to Lena was a stack of folders. The top one was open. I squinted at the bold header. It did not say legal separation. It said draft separation announcement, social media strategy. Below it were pre-written tweets and a LinkedIn post drafted in Graham's voice, talking about mutual respect and growing apart. The papers I had received were not legal documents. They were press releases. He wasn't negotiating a divorce. He was launching a marketing campaign. My phone buzzed against my thigh. I pulled it out, shielding the screen. It was Renee. "Judge is reviewing the freeze order. I need time. Keep him busy. Do not let him leave that room for another 30 minutes. 30 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. If Graham signed that deal on the tablet before the freeze order hit, the money would move, and we would lose the trail. I smoothed my hair and walked back into the light. I needed to be the bait. I walked straight toward Graham, who was standing near the tablet podium, laughing with a man I recognized as the fund's external auditor. Graham saw me approaching, and his smile tightened. He excused himself and stepped toward me, blocking my path to the investors. "I thought I told you to sit down," he whispered, his eyes hard. I want to sign," I said, forcing my voice to sound small and defeated. "I just want to do it quietly." "Can we talk?" "Privately." Just for a second, Graham's shoulders relaxed. He thought he had won. He checked his watch a quick, arrogant glance. "Fine," he said, "but make it fast." I have a schedule. He leaned in close, putting a hand on my lower back in a gesture that looked possessive to the room but felt like a shackle to me. Sign the papers. Marla, he murmured, and I will give you a little extra, maybe $15,000. Call it transitional money. But do not ruin my career tonight. You know you can't survive without me. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the fear behind the arrogance. He was terrified of a scene. I need copies, I said softly. I need copies of everything before I leave. You'll get them. He dismissed, turning his head to wave at a donor. In that split second of distraction, my hand moved. The external auditor had left his suit jacket on the back of a chair while he went to the bar. His business card was sitting on the table next to his drink, right where he had left it after showing it to Graham. I reached out, my movement fluid and invisible, and swiped the card into my palm. I stepped back, clutching the card like a diamond. It was the name and direct line of the man who legally had to verify the fund's assets. It was the link Nina needed to prove the cash flow was fake. 30 minutes, I whispered to myself. I had bought maybe 5. I needed a miracle, or I needed dessert to come early. Graham's patience finally snapped. The charm he reserved for the cameras dissolved the moment we were out of direct earshot of the investors. He stepped into my personal space, looming over me until the smell of his expensive scotch was the only thing I could breathe. You are playing a dangerous game, Marla, he said, his voice dropping to a low, venomous register. If you do not sign that paper in the next 5 minutes, I will send an email to the regional director at Arborline personally. I will tell them you are using my company data to blackmail me. Do you think they keep an operations manager who is under investigation for corporate extortion? You will be fired before your shift starts tomorrow morning. I felt a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. He knew exactly where to hit me. He knew I needed that job to pay the rent on the apartment he was kicking me out of. Before I could respond, Lena Klein materialized at his elbow. She placed a calming hand on his forearm, but her eyes were fixed on me with terrifying intensity. Marla, she said, her voice dripping with a fake medicinal sweetness. Let's be reasonable here. Just tell us what you need, and we can negotiate. There is no need for this to get messy. I looked at her, keeping my face blank. I am not negotiating. Lena's expression hardened instantly, the politeness vanishing like mist. You do not understand how media law works, she said, her tone turning icy. If you push this, I will paint you as the unstable, jealous ex-wife on every business blog in the city within 24 hours. We control the narrative. You are just the glitch. My phone vibrated violently against my hip. I glanced down, expecting a text from Renee, but the notification was from the HR department at Arborline. Subject urgent personnel matter. Ms. Quinn. We have received a formal anonymous complaint regarding the harassment of a prominent local business figure. Pending an internal review, your access to the facility is suspended effective immediately. They were not bluffing. They were actively dismantling my life in real time. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked across the room at Aunt Joni, who was standing near a pillar. I subtly angled my phone so she could see the screen. She did not look shocked. She just signaled me with a small, sharp nod and texted me a second later. Screenshot it. Save the metadata. Do not reply. Anything you say will be cut and pasted to make you look crazy. Just hold the evidence. A second text came through, this time from Nina, and the font seemed to scream panic. Marla, they are scrubbing the files. I just saw the IT director pull the physical hard drives from the server room. They are not just deleting data, they are destroying the hardware. I looked at Joni again. She was already on her phone, dialing. She was calling Darius Holt, an old contact of hers who used to be a compliance director. She was getting instructions on how to legally preserve evidence when the other party is actively destroying it. We were running out of time. Graham saw me checking my phone and mistook my silence for defeat. He grabbed my elbow, his fingers digging painfully into the soft flesh of my arm, and dragged me into a shadowy alcove near the emergency exit. The music was muffled here, but the tension was deafening. I reached into my pocket and felt the volume button on my phone. I pressed it, triggering the recording app I had left running in the background. "Look at you," Graham hissed, his face twisted with a contempt I had never seen before. "You are shaking. You know you have lost." "I am your wife, Graham," I said, forcing my voice to tremble just enough to bait him. "I helped you build this." He laughed, a cruel, short sound. "You," he scoffed. "You are nothing. You are a signature on a page because my credit was bad. That is it." He leaned in close, his eyes black and hollow. "You are just a credit card with a face. Marla. Who do you think will believe you? I am the CEO? You are nobody." My heart hammered against my ribs, but this time it was not fear. It was triumph. He had just confirmed it. He had just admitted that he viewed me as a financial instrument, not a partner. It matched the audio Joni had recorded months ago perfectly. He had just handed me the pattern of conduct that would bury him. "You are right, Graham," I whispered, stepping back out of his grip. "I am nobody, but nobody is watching you right now." My phone buzzed against my palm, a single, sharp vibration that felt like a heartbeat. It was the message I had been praying for. Renee had texted a simple confirmation. The judge had signed the temporary restraining order. The accounts linked to Quinn Harbor Consulting were now frozen. I looked across the room and saw Graham holding a gold pen hovering over the tablet on the podium. He was seconds away from signing a commitment that would lock in millions of dollars, unaware that the bucket he was trying to fill had just been sealed shut. Joni stepped out of the shadows near the service entrance and pulled me aside, shielding a document with her body. "Look at this," she commanded, thrusting a photocopy of a contract into my hands. I squinted at the paper in the dim light. It was a purchase agreement for a luxury condominium in downtown D.C., valued at $1.2 million. My name was printed clearly on the buyer line. Below it was a scrawl that looked like my signature, but the loop of the Q was wrong. It was a digital copy, pasted from a scan. I never bought this," I stammered, staring at the forgery. "I still rent an apartment." "He used this as collateral," Joni explained, her voice tight. "He claimed you owned unencumbered real estate to secure a bridge loan for the company. Marla, if that loan defaults, the bank comes for the asset. When they find out the asset does not exist, they do not sue for money. They prosecute for fraud." The air left my lungs. "If you do not report this right now," Joni continued, "you are looking at federal charges for lying about assets. You have to be the whistleblower, or you are the accomplice." I nodded, my hands shaking as I pulled up the email draft Darius Holt had helped me prepare. It was a structured tip addressed to the Financial Crimes Division. It was not emotional. It was a timeline of facts, attached with the K-1 form and the forged condo deed, all time-stamped to prove I was reporting it before the collapse. I pressed send. The email whooshed away, carrying my old life with it. I looked back at the party. Graham was laughing, clapping a potential investor on the back. He looked invincible. I realized that if I let him leave this room, he would find out about the freeze order in private. He would spin it. He would blame a clerical error or a banking glitch. I could not let him hide in the dark. I needed him to break in the light. I signaled a waiter who was adjusting a microphone stand near the small stage. "Excuse me," I said, forcing a shy, grateful smile. "Could you move that wireless mic stand just a little closer to my husband's table? I want to surprise him with a thank you speech in a moment, but I am nervous about walking all the way up to the main stage." The waiter melted at the request. "Of course, ma'am." He moved the stand right next to Graham's elbow. The microphone was live. Graham was too busy preening to notice the black foam head inches from his wine glass. My phone buzzed again. It was the final nail from Nina. She had sent a screenshot of the internal approval logs for the Cayman transfers. In the column for authorized by, the initials L, K appeared row after row. I looked at Lena Klein. She was standing by the bar, checking her makeup in a compact mirror. She was not just the PR director spinning the story. She was the one holding the pen on the money laundering. Joni leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. "Remember," she whispered, "tonight is not about making him look like a cheater. Nobody cares about a bad husband. Make him look like a liability. Tonight, we end him with the penal code." At that moment, the double doors to the kitchen swung open. A team of servers wheeled out a massive 3-tiered birthday cake, sparkling with sparklers that hissed and popped. The room turned to watch the spectacle. The cake was the timer. Once they cut that cake, the party was over, and Graham would check his phone. I smoothed my dress. I did not wait for the song to start. I walked toward the microphone that was waiting for me. It was time to serve the main course. The MC gestured toward me with a wide, toothy grin, clearly expecting a tearful tribute from the grateful wife. Graham stood just behind him, his hands clasped behind his back, looking at me with a mixture of pity and warning. He was posing for the cameras, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch who had outgrown his simple partner. The room fell into a heavy, expectant silence. They were waiting for me to cry. They were waiting for the breakdown. I did not cry. I walked up to the microphone stand that the waiter had positioned perfectly near Graham's table. I adjusted the height, staring directly into the lens of the local news camera. "I want to thank my husband," I said, my voice steady and amplified across the ballroom. "He taught me the most important lesson of my life tonight. He taught me that while people might deceive you, paperwork does not lie." Graham's smile faltered instantly. He lunged forward, invading my space, and leaned into the microphone, his shoulder bumping mine. "Marla is very emotional right now." He chuckled, the sound hollow and strained. "Everyone, please forgive her. She is going through a difficult transition, and sometimes she gets a little confused." He tried to steer me away, his hand clamping down on my arm with bruising force, but I planted my feet. I turned to face him, ensuring the microphone caught every syllable. "I am not confused, Graham," I said loudly. "But since we are sharing truths, can you confirm to everyone here, to your investors, to the press, that you have never signed any financial documents on my behalf without my consent?" Graham blinked. He looked at the crowd, then back at me. He was so arrogant, so sure that I was bluffing, that he did not even hesitate. He straightened his tie and looked directly at the investors. "Never," he declared, his voice booming with false sincerity. "I have never done that. I built this company with my own hands." The trap snapped shut. I pulled my phone from my clutch and pressed play. I held it up to the microphone. The audio quality was crystal clear, blasting through the high-end speakers Joni had rigged. "You are just a credit card with a face, Marla. Who do you think will believe you? I am the CEO. You are nobody." The silence that followed was not polite. It was paralyzed. Every person in the room froze. The cruelty in his voice was undeniable, stripping away the polished image he had spent years curating. Lena Klein reacted first. She sprinted toward the audio booth, making a slashing motion across her throat to the technician. The sound cut out for a fraction of a second, but then it roared back to life, louder than before. Joni had engaged the backup feed. Graham's face turned a violent shade of red. He grabbed the microphone from the stand, shouting over the recording of his own voice. This is edited," he stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "She staged this. She must have pulled this from the file server backup. She is hacking our systems." The room gasped. He had just admitted there was a file server to hack. He had just admitted knowledge of the very data he claimed didn't exist. From the center of the room, a woman stood up. It was Renee Calder. She was not wearing a party dress. She was wearing a charcoal blazer, and she looked like she was standing in a federal courtroom. "Actually, Mr. Voss," Renee said, her voice projecting clearly without a microphone, "that is not a hack. That is evidence. My name is Renee Calder, acting counsel for Mrs. Voss. I am serving you notice that as of 10 minutes ago. A temporary restraining order has been issued freezing all assets related to Quinn Harbor Consulting and Voss Meridian." She held up a manila folder. "We have also filed a motion for the preservation of evidence," Renee continued, walking toward the stage. "Any attempt to delete files from your server, which you just admitted exists, or destroy hardware from this moment forward, will be considered federal obstruction of justice." The phrase obstruction of justice hit the room like a grenade. A heavy-set man in the front row, the lead investor for the new fund, stood up slowly. His face was pale. "Did she say obstruction?" he asked, his voice cutting through the murmurs. He pulled out his phone. Beside him, 2 other bankers did the same. The dominoes began to fall. The polite veneer of the birthday party shattered as the room transformed into a panic of risk management. Phones lit up like fireflies in the dark. I watched as the external auditor, the man whose card I had stolen, quietly slipped his laptop into his bag and began backing away toward the exit. Graham looked around wildly. The investors were not looking at him anymore. They were looking at their legal counsel. He turned to me, his eyes wide with shock. "Marla." "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I told you," I said, stepping back from the microphone. "I am just the witness." The waiters had just set the massive birthday cake on the central table, but nobody was looking at the frosting. Graham reached for my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep like claws, trying to physically drag me toward the side exit. He was desperate to get me into the shadows where he could twist the narrative, but I planted my feet firmly on the carpet. "You wanted me silent," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the murmurs of the crowd. "But you chose the crowd. Graham, you picked the audience." Before he could pull harder, the double doors at the back of the room swung open again. It was not a waiter this time. It was Darius Holt, flanked by a representative from Stonehall Trust and 3 men in dark suits who moved with the distinct, heavy authority of federal compliance officers. They marched straight through the stunned guests, parting the sea of investors like a ship breaking ice. Darius stopped in front of us and held out his hand. "Graham Voss," Darius said, his tone flat and official. "We have received a credible report of systemic asset inflation and wire fraud. Under the terms of your lending agreements and the federal preservation order just signed, you are required to surrender all company devices immediately. Hand over the phone and the tablet." Graham turned pale, his grip on my arm loosening until he fell away entirely. To my right, Lena Klein stepped forward, her face a mask of indignation. "This is ridiculous," Lena spat, trying to rally the room. "I am the director of communications. I can assure you that all transfers were standard operating procedure. I had no knowledge of any irregularities." Really, a voice called out from behind her. Nina Sutter stepped out from behind a pillar. She was shaking, but she held a sheaf of papers in her hand like a shield. She walked right up to Lena and handed her a document with a wet, blue stamp on the bottom page. "It is all here. Lena," Nina said, her voice wavering but determined. "I submitted the affidavit to the authorities 10 minutes ago. It includes the transfer logs you approved with your own digital key. You are not a bystander. You are the architect." Lena stared at the paper, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. She looked for an exit, but there was nowhere to run. Graham, seeing his wall of defense crumbling, pivoted to the investors. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "She is blackmailing me," he shouted, sweat dripping down his temple. She asked for $1 million to stay quiet. This is extortion. Renee Calder slammed a file folder onto the table next to the untouched cake. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Wrong. Renee declared, "Here is the time-stamped timeline of events. Mrs. Voss contacted federal authorities to report fraud 2 hours ago. She explicitly refused any settlement money. She is not asking for a payout. She is asking for the law." At that exact second, a synchronized chime rippled through the room. It was the sound of 50 phones receiving a priority notification at once. The lead investor pulled his phone from his pocket, frowned, and then looked up at Graham with eyes that had turned to stone. "It is an automated alert from the risk management system," the investor announced to the room. "A material risk event has been triggered. An active federal investigation has been initiated against Voss Meridian." The room erupted into chaos. The lead investor did not wait for a meeting room. He turned to the 2 other board members standing near the buffet. "I am calling for an immediate vote," he said, ignoring Graham entirely. "Motion to suspend Graham Voss as CEO effective immediately to mitigate legal liability." "Seconded," the other banker said instantly. "Carried," the lead investor finished. He looked at Graham. "You are out, Graham. Do not touch anything. Do not talk to anyone." The empire had been decapitated before the candles were even lit. Graham looked at me, and for the first time in 5 years, I saw him truly see me. He did not see a resource. He did not see a credit score. He saw the person who had just dismantled his life. "Marla, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I can fix this." I leaned in, close enough that he could smell the cheap perfume he hated, and spoke soft enough that only he could hear. "I am not the bridge, Graham." I said, "I am the record keeper." I picked up a pen from the table. I did not sign the divorce papers that would have saddled me with his debt. Instead, I signed the witness confirmation form Renee held out to me, ensuring my cooperation with the prosecution in exchange for full immunity. I turned and walked away. Behind me, the sound of a silver spoon hitting a china plate rang out, marking the end of the party. I pushed through the heavy doors and stepped out into the cold, crisp night air of the parking lot. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a notification from Renee. Freeze confirmed. Investigation opened. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that finally felt like my own. I did not walk away with a fortune. I walked away with something far more valuable. I had the truth, and it had a timestamp. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below sharing your city or country, and let's chat about what you would have done in Marla's shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.